Ladies and gentlemen, if I may ask you please to rise to stand for her honor, the Honorable Judith Guichon, Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. It's a great honor to welcome and introduce to you for remarks the Honorable Judith Guichon, OBC, Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia. Your Honor, we'd love to have you visit with us.
Good afternoon, Mr. Wright, Mr. Scorca, Dr. Lindemann, Maestro Darlington, and I haven't met all you folks, but I'm presuming you're here. Opera staff, trustees, supporters, volunteers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this invitation to join you at the first general session of this international gathering of opera enthusiasts. And thank you also for the invitation to attend tomorrow's performance of Tea, A Mirror of the Soul. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm sad to say that I am rather ignorant on the subject of opera. Although I was very fortunate to study music in school and to attend both the symphony and the ballet growing up in Montreal, unfortunately I was never exposed to opera. I suspect that this is the case with many young people, and even more so today with young people growing up with entertainment so often provided electronically. I know that many of my friends today have told me how enthusiastic they are about the ability to see opera in Kamloops, which is a smaller city in the interior of British Columbia. They can now go and see it not live, but at special showings at one of the movie theaters. They have special Saturday premieres of opera. It's not as exciting or as coming to the real thing, but many of them who are supporters and do travel to Victoria and to Vancouver to go to the opera, they're just not willing in the winter to face the Coquihalla Highway. And so they're very glad of this opportunity. It's second best, but it's better than nothing. And they'll drive from quite some distance. They'll drive for an hour or so from some of the other village towns in the area to go to Kamloops to see these performances. And I wondered if maybe somehow that would be a medium or a way to introduce to our children in the high schools or in the schools, if we could use this same medium to introduce opera to them. Because I truly believe that the younger we are when we are first to exposed to any art form, the more ingrained it becomes and the more it becomes part of our culture. Recently, I've been most fortunate to attend all sorts of musical events, including the Victoria Symphony, the Victoria Youth Orchestra, And on Monday night, the Victoria Choral Society Spring Concert, 130 wonderful voices. It was a real treat. This is certainly a perk of my new position as Lieutenant Governor that I value very much. At the performance of the Choral Society, I noticed several names on the program with asterisks alongside the names. On further reading, I discovered they were high school students from the High School Choral Immersion Program. And this program provides young singers aged 14 to 18 years of age an opportunity to work and perform with professional groups. I thought, what a great plan for mentoring upcoming enthusiastic children. Maybe there's something here also that could be used to further opera. I can only imagine, or perhaps I can't even imagine, the challenges facing your industry between unions, aging infrastructure and venues, artists, financial downturns, competition for discretionary spending, only to name a few. But like every other group today, there's a great resource out there. With the first wave of baby boomers retiring, this new wave of gray power is full of energy, passion, expertise, and some even have managed to put away a few dollars. There is, however, a lot of competition for their backing, so we cannot assume their loyalty. At Government House in Victoria, where I live, we're very fortunate to have about 400 of these committed individuals. The Friends of Government House do everything from looking after our 36 acres of garden to singing in a choir, giving guided tours of our building, and managing our archives. Hours of volunteer service and they're a large, large contribution to the wonderful legacy that we in British Columbia are very, very, we're very fortunate to have this ceremonial home. Not every province in Canada has one. So I am sure that with the combined resources of Opera America and the Opera Volunteers International, you will find creative ways to harness the available resources and mentor the next generation of opera supporters. May this be a most successful conference for you, and may you develop the beginning of many new friendships. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor, for joining us this afternoon and for your kind and also your very perceptive words. We appreciate it very much, and I look forward to joining us Thursday night at the Opera. Good afternoon. Vancouver Opera's music director, Jonathan Darlington, our entire staff, our board of directors and volunteer corps join me in welcoming you to Vancouver for the, I think, 44th Opera America Conference. The organization was founded in 1970, and that small group of companies met that first year, and in one version or another have met ever since. It's an organization that has grown in importance and intensity and in value to us over those years. I'm pleased to welcome so many longtime colleagues and newer professional acquaintances to this beautiful and dynamic city. And I'm also very pleased to be working with Opera.ca and Opera Volunteers International. I'm pleased to greet the nearly 30 Vancouver residents and colleagues who've taken time from their schedules to join us at several of the general sessions, as well as at Friday's exciting showcase, A Decade of New Canadian Opera, and the Opera American New Samplers work. And I also want to say how grateful I am to the province of British Columbia for providing support to the Opera Company to help us support this conference, and we're very grateful to the province for that. All of us at Vancouver Opera have worked really hard to provide you with a memorable conference, concentrating almost all of our efforts in supplicating the weather gods and doing all things imaginable to ensure that, for heaven's sakes, you're able to see the mountains and keep your umbrellas furled. I've attended many of these conferences over the years and have always and continually marveled at the skill, adroitness, and good humor of the Opera America staff in executing such a project. I can now add to that a deep appreciation for the collegiality and thorough professionalism in planning the premier opera gathering on the continent. There's a feast of insights, experiences, wisdom, and innovation awaiting all of us over the next few days. I urge you to dig deeply into this rich menu and learn all you can from your colleagues, as I will be doing as well. And I also urge you to find a little bit of time to take a walk, breathe in the smells of the sea, exhilarate in the snow-capped peaks, and appreciate the glorious blue skies over your head, because we worked really hard on that. And explore this wonderful city I've been privileged to call home for 14 years. Welcome and thank you for being here. And it's now my pleasure to introduce to you the chairman of Opera America's Board of Directors, Dr. Frayda Lindemann.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you, Jim, for a very kind introduction. On behalf of all of us who came here, we are grateful to you for welcoming us to this beautiful city, and it really is beautiful. Convening our annual conference in Canada illustrates that opera is the most international of art forms. Many of the same singers perform on stages around the world. Physical productions travel from country to country. Tomorrow will be the Canadian premiere of Tea, although the production originated in the United States at the Santa Fe Opera. The composer Tan Dun is Chinese. In Tea, he combines Eastern and Western musical traditions into a single compelling piece of music theater. Our core repertoire is the fusion of masterpieces from many nations, now being expanded by American, Canadian, Middle Eastern, and Asian composers. The international character of opera is reflected in the unique partnership that Opera America enjoys with Opera.ca. I would like now to salute Opera.ca Board Chair Patrick Corrigan and Executive Director Christina Loewen, who work collaboratively with Opera America throughout the year. Together, we are dedicated to advancing opera in both our countries. Also with us in the audience is Audrey Youngers, manager of Opera Europa. Opera America helped to establish Opera Europa more than 15 years ago, and we are delighted that it has grown magnificently under the leadership of Audrey and Nicholas Payne to include 127 members from 35 countries. As Marc will describe in a few minutes, the issues being discussed in Europe are the same that we will talk about over the next 3 days. We are separate organizations bound together by shared challenges and opportunities. I would also like to salute Opera Volunteers International and its president, Julie Benson. Opera Volunteers International was established soon after Opera America in the early 1970s to serve the volunteers who support our opera companies through contributions, direct service, and advocacy in their communities. Whether they are board members, guild members, or individual volunteers, the leadership and support of volunteers is essential to opera in the United States and in Canada. And I don't just say this because I am a volunteer. In my more than 30 years as a board member of the Metropolitan Opera, I have long relationships with the volunteers who have provided institutional continuity and financial security through the tenures of several general managers. We are part of a global community. The word community is usually thought of in a local sense, but Webster offers several definitions that describe our purpose. One of them suggests action. This is it. A self-organized network of people with a common agenda or interest who collaborate by sharing ideas, information, and resources. And that's us. This definition captures the essence of our organizations. Through Opera America, Opera.ca, and Opera Europa, we collaborate and we share. Ideas, information, and resources are our currency. A conference like this accelerates the rate of collaboration and sharing. Throughout the year, by telephone or email, we share. At occasional meetings, we collaborate on projects. But here in Vancouver, with more than 400 people in the same hotel, away from the day-to-day pressures of the office, the potential for collaboration increases geometrically. We will all gain through this exchange, so I invite you all to participate fully. Since our last meeting in Philadelphia, Opera America has opened the National Opera Center. It was indeed the highlight of our year and a landmark event in the history of Opera America. I hope many of you were there, and those who weren't there, I hope you'll come and see it. It's really beautiful and wonderful. It's a custom-built facility for auditions, recordings, and rehearsal. But in this context, I like to think of it as a community center for collaboration and sharing. It is a physical reflection of our core purpose, and I invite you to visit the Opera Center if you've not already had the pleasure of seeing it. We are delighted that a symposium is meeting in New York right now, using our facilities and technology in the Opera Center. The audience in our audition recital hall has had a full day of panels and discussions and is now watching a live stream of this opening session as we speak. It's just amazing. In fact, all the general sessions are being live streamed to our members and friends around the world. No question about it, we are a global community. It is now my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce Opera America's Chief Community Engineer, our President and CEO, Marc Scorca.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you, Frayda. It's wonderful to see you all in this beautiful city. Last year, those of you at our Philadelphia conference heard me announce that I was running for President of the United States. I interpreted your laughter, as would any politician, as encouragement, which I appreciated. It was a short campaign that ended by the time the conference was over, but it was fun while it lasted. With the opening of the new Opera Center and the increased visibility of Opera America, I feel as if I were elected to the position of chief fortune teller. I receive many more inquiries than ever before from the media, funders, and students writing theses asking about the current state of the art form and the future prospects for the industry. I continue to believe that we're in one of the most furtive creative periods ever experienced in American or Canadian opera. More new works are being produced by more young artists who wish to express themselves through opera than ever. The repertoire is expanding, and the art form itself is evolving to include the inventiveness of a new generation of composers, librettists, directors, and designers. You'll see some examples of these pieces during the Canadian Opera Showcase and the New Works Sampler on Friday evening. Aspiring singers are creating their own performance opportunities through the formation of innumerable opera ensembles that capitalize on their entrepreneurial skills. The urge to perform opera appears to be irrepressible, and these efforts result in productions of a broad repertoire in a variety of venues and formats that reach new and frequently younger audiences. Today, the public has more access to opera and is displaying great appetite for HD transmissions to movie theaters, sports stadiums and parks, live streams, YouTube archives, and rich web content. We've not yet discovered a way to capture revenue from this expanded audience base, but interest in opera is strong, and it's up to us to reimagine the ways we relate to this expanded public. Above all, we have to make the live performance experience sufficiently compelling to overcome the price differential between good, inexpensive electronic media and the real thing. This is the challenge for established traditional opera companies. As you have come to know, I look to current events for ideas for my opening remarks. The election itself, irrespective of my failed campaign, was probably a disappointment on some level for everyone in the room, especially for Canadians who must wish that their southern neighbor would elect a government that works. We had Hurricane Sandy, the tragic shooting in Newtown, a fiscal cliff that led to sequestration, a massive explosion in West Texas, and a bombing in Boston, to name just a few unsettling events. The lesson from this string of tragedies is that we need the arts more than ever for comfort, as a demonstration of the power of cooperation, and as a source for creative inspiration that can help address some of the problems that stump our leaders. Regrettably, most of our elected officials haven't ever experienced the collaborative joy of singing in a chorus, playing in a symphony, or watching an opera performance from backstage. Our nations would be better governed if there were a congressional chorale and a parliamentary pops orchestra. Both of which would be advised by Michael Kaiser. As technology and political rhetoric isolate and fracture us, arts events build community. 2,500 years ago, the Greeks understood that gathering people together, elbow to elbow, to experience an emotional response to shared stories increased civic unity. It's no less true today. I'm always deeply moved to observe people greeting one another before performances, during intermissions, and afterward when they've shared the sorrow of Violetta's death, the grace of the Countess's forgiveness, or outrage over Otello's misplaced jealousy. Opera is not just another form of entertainment. Like all the arts, opera deepens the capacity for compassion among our fellow citizens, illustrates the potential of human achievement, makes our cities better places to live, and builds international understanding. These facts don't alleviate our responsibility, though, to create even greater civic impact and to communicate it more effectively to policymakers. As I learned at a recent Opera Europa meeting, this need to create and communicate about our civic impact unites companies across North America and Europe. In the United States, the bedrock of our nonprofit system is being examined by policymakers who want to narrow the budget deficit by limiting tax deductions. From many of our visits on the Hill this year, we've learned that legislators don't fully appreciate what the nonprofit sector contributes to our society or how it works. More alarming, they really don't understand why the arts are part of the nonprofit sector. In their view, we're just a very expensive form of entertainment enjoyed and supported by wealthy patrons. In Europe, the generous government subsidies we've envied for decades are shrinking and shrinking fast. In Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and even France, pressure to cut their deficits is forcing these governments to reduce support of culture. Without a parallel system of private support, opera companies in these countries are severely challenged. But even private donors today are motivated to support causes that deliver civic value. As is natural to artists, we've been product-focused, with the stage at the center of our attention. We've not given equal emphasis to the impact of our work on the communities around us. There's a prevailing assumption that if our product is good enough, smart people will come to it, and that people who aren't smart enough to appreciate what we do are victims of their own ignorance. We continue to invest in the quality of our productions and promotional campaigns that push our messages out to the public, but we've not yet learned how to engage our publics in two-way conversation about our work, or to facilitate discussion among them that accesses what they already know about opera and unleashes their enthusiasm for it. A member of our strategy committee said at our February meeting, we have to be as responsible for the excellence of our audiences as we are for the excellence of our performances. Frayda also spoke about Opera.America, Opera.ca, and Opera Europa as communities. I like to think of us as a community of laboratories. Each of you experiments every year in production, marketing, education, fundraising, and other areas. Many of you are testing ways to increase your civic impact both within the Opera House and outside the walls of your theaters. Our field is more inventive as a result of your independent creativity and, yes, a certain level of competitiveness. Here in Vancouver, we'll learn from one another and from experts from outside the field. The next session this afternoon will feature our brilliant colleague Doug McLennan in a demonstration of the power of crowdsourced learning. And you will hear now from today's most articulate advocate for the importance of the arts in our society. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, the former president of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, Don Randel.
Ladies and gentlemen of the choir, I have come to preach to you. Perhaps in the present context, I should have said, ladies and gentlemen of the chorus, with anvils clanging in the background. Of course, to say preaching to the choir is usually meant to trivialize an occasion on which audience is already persuaded of what the speaker has to say. It may further imply that other audiences are likely to remain skeptical. But I should like to defend preaching to the choir or chorus. This is an activity as old as human history. As a professional student of medieval liturgy, I can testify that for thousands of years, people of similar beliefs have made a practice of coming together to celebrate their beliefs and to encourage one another in the practice of those beliefs. More recent religious groups have called these gatherings revivals. For a start, then, no one should feel bad about gathering a group of opera professionals simply for the sake of gathering them and for the sake of reaffirming belief in an activity about which we all care deeply. One of the goals will be simply to leave having been revived to some extent. But what else might be on the agenda of both the preacher and the choir or chorus in this particular gathering? First of all, the preacher ought simply to thank the choir for their considerable labors. It's not easy coming to choir practice and getting up early on Sunday morning, in a manner of speaking. But it is a great deal more than just showing up at the appointed times. However noble the cause, it is hard work in the face of both cultural and financial stress, and all the while one must remain relentlessly cheerful to friends and foes alike about the importance of the cause and about the need to awaken ever more people to this great art and to recruit ever more people to its support. So thank you on behalf of your communities and indeed on the behalf of the nation as a whole. For the work you do, the country is better for it, and we should not apologize about asserting that. Now what? Now we need to talk about the situation in which the arts in general and opera in particular find themselves in America. Here I must apologize to our friends and colleagues in Canada, at the same time praising them. The fact is that Canada does many things much better than the United States does. What I'm going to report now is mostly about the United States, and perhaps it will serve as a cautionary tale for countries like Canada and some European countries that do better by the arts and culture. So when I say I and we and the nation, especially if it's in negative terms, it's about the United States. I'll start with first principles. The arts are a fundamental human right of every individual. As Martha Nussbaum points out, every human being has the capability of and the right to being well-fed, well-housed, physically healthy, and to the exercise of their intellectual and creative capacities. To deny anyone the possibility to experience art and to create it is to deny them a basic human right. It deserves to be called a crime. Every child comes into this world a born scientist, a born humanist, and a born artist. Every one of them is born intensely curious about nature. Every one of them comes to love hearing stories and inventing new ones. Every one of them is born with the instinct first to scribble, then draw, then paint, and to bang on things and see what kinds of sounds they make, and to sing the songs one hopes they have heard from birth, and to move their bodies in relation to sound. The trouble is that society does a lot to beat much of this out of them. And there is much evidence to prove that by the time they reach school, for many children, it is already too late. Hence, for all that we may bemoan and should continue to bemoan forcefully the state of the nation's schools, by which I mean the schools in the United States, we must also insist on investing in the lives of children from the moment of their birth and even before, so that they will not be deprived of what is their right to exercise their intellectual and artistic, one should not really distinguish those things, intellectual and artistic, the exercise of those capacities. Thus, the philosophical and I would say moral underpinnings of our undertaking. What is the practical reality that we face in seeking to live by these principles? First, we must recognize and contend with the fact that we live in a culture with a deep anti-intellectual streak. By and large, our national character, I speak of the United States again, is rather suspicious of the kinds of people we call eggheads or woolly-headed professors. This view makes common cause with a vigorous stereotype that is a holdover from 19th century Romanticism, according to which artists of any kind are basically crazy or slobs or impossible to get along with, or all three. Opera may have attracted a greater than average share of such stereotypes, but we'll come back to that. The result is that we don't often give public expression to the view that the life of the mind is the life most worth living, if not the only one. And we have very few public figures of prominence whom we regard as representing, first and foremost, the values of the life of the mind. I've often heard it lamented that even university presidents, of which I was one once, are no longer the intellectual leaders for the nation that they once were, but are now too afraid to speak up about anything of consequence. That they are now beholden instead to financial interests and the marketplace of popular culture. The situation with university presidents was always more mixed than some now imagine, but similar things could be said of other professions as well. Who are the journalists of today that the great majority of citizens implicitly trust? Who are the captains of industry that we recognize as caring about the public good at least as much as about creating shareholder value and returning it to themselves and other shareholders on a quarterly basis? We seem now to be running short even of high-ranking military officers who command the respect of the general public. We also face a political system that is born of this national character and simultaneously acts to reinforce it. As settlers moved across the country to the west, they created towns. And the first projects in creating a new town were to build a church and to build a school, charging one of their number to be the teacher because he or she was thought to be appropriately educated, him or herself. By this method were thousands of independent school districts created around the country, whether good, bad, or indifferent. The creation of the states in the United States did not much alter this dynamic. To this day, local citizens set school budgets with some support from the states and some mandates as to curriculum. But the largest contribution to these budgets is in general property tax revenue, with the result that richer communities are likely to have better schools than poorer ones, and arts programs are easily dispensed with when there is a resistance to raising local taxes or when state support declines. At the federal level, there's very little ability to intervene at all forcefully. The Secretary of Education has only a few carrots and almost no sticks. State and localities, furthermore, are in the main free to decline to take the carrots, just as they are in the matter of health care, which is a matter before us at the moment in the United States. At least we do have a Secretary of Education. But unlike virtually all of the other developed countries, we lack entirely a secretary and a corresponding department of arts and culture, or something comparable. We should note here that the signs are not altogether encouraging in some other developed countries. In the UK, the relevant ministry is now called the Department for Culture, Media, and Sport. I take this not to be a good sign. On the other hand, perhaps if we declared opera to be a sport, cities would build opera houses in the way they build elaborate sports arenas and stadia, largely at the public's expense. We do, of course, have the National Endowment for the Humanities and a National Endowment for the Arts, each clinging to a perilous life on a budget of around $150 million, or the cost of one F-22 airplane. Now, lest you think that I am a socialist pure and simple, which I am not, at least not pure and simple, I should say that I do not believe that the solution to all of the problems in the world of opera or the arts or education would be solved by greater central control. And given the pathological fear of government control in so many quarters these days, there is simply not going to be a central governmental solution to any of these problems, no matter what I or anyone else believes about it. Of course, the national character suffers from a kind of schizophrenia about governmental control, since it clearly has a considerable tolerance for the ability of many special interests to feed at the public trough. And one can't help but be mildly amused at the self-serving inconsistency of it. Some of you may remember that some years ago, the Mobil Oil Corporation took out regularly a small box ad on the op-ed page of the New York Times. These ads, which necessarily had to address important matters other than whose gasoline you should buy, regularly dealt in alternation with two subjects. The first was that the federal government should absolutely stay out of the petroleum business and leave it to the good folks at Mobil, who know that business better than any bureaucrat could, and to the free market, which allocates resources most efficiently, especially with the considerable help of depletion allowances and significant tax breaks. The other regular topic was the high quality of masterpiece theater, which free market champion Mobil sponsored and for which we should be grateful, but which was produced by and bought from that great socialist institution, the British Broadcasting Corporation. In retrospect, I suppose we could take pride in the fact that culture may have been the first industry in the United States to engage seriously in outsourcing and offshoring American jobs, as many companies only learned to do later. Somehow I doubt that they teach this in business schools. The underlying question here is the responsibility of the state to its citizens. The only such responsibility that we take truly seriously in the United States and spend real money on is defense, though we spend much too much money on it, in large part because of the power of the economic interests of the arms industry. Before I go further, I should insist that even defense has a relationship to opera. Many of you will know John Adams' opera, Dr. Atomic. The moral voice in that work is that of physicist Robert Wilson. He was my colleague at Cornell for many years after his work on the Manhattan Project. He later became the founding director of the Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory in Batavia, Illinois, the most powerful machine of its kind in the world until the United States effectively turned over leadership in particle physics to Europe. Bob was asked to testify before Congress about, among other things, the very substantial cost of the project. One congressman asked him whether the accelerator would contribute to the national defense. He replied that it would not contribute to the national defense except to make the nation worth defending. Well, your opera company is part of what makes the nation worth defending, and you should not hesitate to assert that forcefully. Beyond defense, we now lag other developed nations in our investment in what we might think were other responsibilities of the state to its citizens, most notably health care and education, which ought to be as fundamental rights and not just for the well-to-do. Just as we need to invest in the nation's physical infrastructure, which we do not do adequately, we must invest in our intellectual and our cultural infrastructure. At the moment, we are steadily disinvesting in this infrastructure. Yet, absent such investment, we will not flourish and prevail in worldwide competition, nor will we, in the end, be remembered for being the greatest nation the world has ever known, with apologies once again, even though we continue to be the richest. But we have philanthropy and support from the private sector of the economy. It is certainly true that the United States has a culture of philanthropy that is unequaled anywhere else in the world. Private philanthropy created and still sustains in the United States the greatest universities in the world and arguably a significant number of the world's greatest cultural institutions. Though in this latter sphere, there is serious competition abroad, and it is almost always attributable primarily to public investment. But the private sector has proved that it cannot be counted on in the long term. Corporate support for cultural organizations is declining and is now increasingly in the hands of the marketing departments of these companies. And the corporate sector has very seriously dismantled its capacity for the kind of basic research that fueled economic well-being for a good many years. I need only cite the sad case of Bell Laboratories. The philanthropy of individuals and of some of the foundations that they have created has always been much the most important in education and in culture. And it must be said that a great deal of new wealth has been accumulated by individuals in recent times. Unfortunately, in the world of foundations, much of the old money, Ford, Rockefeller, and others, has left arts and culture as well as higher education. The world of foundations is now dominated by an orientation towards solving specific problems through specific programs with clearly measurable outcomes. The arts and culture are sure to come up short in that orientation as compared with conquering disease and some number of social ills. And the new wealthy are often entrepreneurs who may not have grown up in a school or a family that devoted time and resources to the arts, and who have been successful at solving basically one problem: how to make a lot of money with one or limited set of ideas. Some of such people will want to approach their philanthropy, if any, with a similar turn of mind and suppose that the methods of their business are equally applicable to any and all possible businesses, including cultural and educational organizations. Cultural and educational organizations simply don't work this way, something that even the rating agencies don't properly understand, along with all the other things they failed to understand until it was too late. In the world of arts and culture, as well as in education, we need to think and act not on the value proposition that every entrepreneur can advance, but instead on the values proposition. What, after all, are we trying to accomplish beyond mere survival? What, in fact, justifies our survival? This really is a matter of values. And we mustn't be distracted by the debasement of the term values by all of those businesses that have paid an advertising agency to help them develop a mission and vision and values statement to put on their website or their packaging or their ads. We really do have values that matter. And we will succeed only to the extent that our practices remain closely aligned with those values. What are they? In the most general terms, what we value most is bringing great art to as many people as we can hope to reach, thereby enabling them in one among many ways to exercise their intellectual and creative capacities. which, as I have said, is their fundamental human right. We are talking about one of the things that makes life worth living, right up there with love. Opera itself may be higher or lower on any individual person's list, but it is certainly among the complex of human creations that makes life worth living. If someone asks you why they should spend their philanthropic or tax dollars on the arts or education rather than on saving lives, you may reasonably respond, saving lives for what? Every human life is worth saving, but only if it is also allowed to, is nurtured to, become fully human. And that means experiencing and participating in humankind's inborn capacity for artistic creativity. Who among us with that experience can imagine life without it? Ultimately, we exist as professionals in the arts to bring that experience to as many lives as possible. As professionals in the arts, and in opera in particular, what kinds of practices align or participate in those values? Ultimately, if we are to retain and increase audiences, opera must be felt to matter. We are, after all, hoping to reach deep inside people, take them by the intellectual and emotional lapels, and shake them as only music can. But since this is an experience that we're hoping to create at the individual level, we must take account of the infinite variety of individuals and their experience. This means that no single approach is guaranteed to work for every person that we might like to attract. It certainly means in our own day that not everyone, or perhaps even very many people, have been raised to believe that opera is important. Unfortunately, a number of stereotypes easily attach themselves to opera and may interfere with our efforts. Let's face it, lots of silly things happen in opera. It's easy to make fun of when the fat lady sings. Prima donna is a phrase with a well-known meaning among many people who have never been to or heard an opera, and it may not be helpful in getting them to go. Opera buffs. I know Dr. Freud is in the audience, but not that Dr. Freud. Opera buffs are a special breed, and ordinary people may not at first ever, or even ever, aspire to be like them. And then opera may be seen by many to be the province principally of a wealthy elite. This perception is easily reinforced by all of those pictures in the newspapers of black tie galas. I sometimes think that all arts organizations should eliminate black tie galas if they really want to expand their audiences, but one could argue about that. This is not just about audiences. It is also about public support, as when one hears it said that when an individual or a foundation gives money to an opera company or other arts organization, it is rich people giving money to rich people at the taxpayer's expense. That this is not true does not prevent people from saying it and believing it, and thus proposing that foundations and charitable donations be taxed. We must be mindful of stereotypes and strive against them when they get in the way of what we're trying to accomplish with real people. Even more important, however, is to strive to reach people where they actually live. And they don't all live in New York. Not even everyone who lives in New York lives in New York. Every company will need to find out how to engage its own community. And what works for one cannot be guaranteed to work for another, though the sharing of ideas at gatherings like this one is very important. Here we confront the culture of sports, which dominates the nation's thinking about most things. We insist on rankings. There must be winners and losers. We insist on knowing who is number one. This has terrible effects, and higher education and cultural organizations suffer from these obsessions as well. It is not about whether your company is better or worse than another company. It is about whether your company is good in the ways that it needs to be good in order to serve your particular audience. Finally, a word about repertory. I've talked a lot about great art, and that too scares some people who can play into the stereotype of elite culture. Great art can be funny, don't forget. Wit is one of humankind's greatest creative gifts. And the imagined boundary between so-called high culture and so-called low culture has steadily been eroded. Genres are historical constructs rooted in time and place, and one will hope to teach audiences something about them, and thus about why some works are made in the way that they are made. But we are not in the business of mere entertainment, though opera can and will be entertaining. This helps in thinking about who the competition for our audiences is. The fact that many people are prepared to pay prices rivaling those at the Metropolitan Opera in New York in order to attend professional sports contests or rock concerts does not mean that we should try to make opera more like professional sports contests or rock concerts. We want to reach people with a non-trivial kind of entertainment that we hope they will find more rewarding than the lowest common denominator. And we also want to reach people who like to think about serious matters in life. Here, opera companies have a considerable advantage over symphony orchestras, I think. One can appeal directly to audiences whose interests may not be, at first, principally musical. We must continue to produce new work that will be relevant to new audiences in our time. Among other things, this argues for more collaboration with other cultural organizations. There are many ways in which, for example, your opera company and your local museum can cooperate to reach both of your audiences, where they may not now overlap, and thus increase the size of both. Your mission is important so long as it supports the right values. The country, both the United States and Canada, needs your opera company now more than it ever has. The country may not always appear to know this, but you must find the ways to reach them and inspire them, because they will be the better for it. You are a mighty chorus, and you must carry on singing more mightily than ever, and I know you will. Thank you.
Thank you, Don, for reminding us how valiant is our personal endeavor. As opera presenters and opera lovers, thank you, Don. You give us the courage to carry on. I hope you all have a marvelous conference. Take advantage of all that you will hear and see. And now please stand for the departure of the Lieutenant Governor. Thank you. This session is over.
It is.
Thank you all.